Hello everyone, this is Brett Lonsdale from Lightning Tools, and I want to welcome you to the session this afternoon, at least this afternoon here in the UK, on connecting external data to SharePoint. So before we begin, I'll just introduce myself very briefly. So as I mentioned, my name is Brett Lonsdale. I'm one of the two founders of Lightning Tools, and we're celebrating our 10th year. So it doesn't seem like 10 years ago, but we established Lightning Tools 10 years ago now. And actually one of our first products that we created was all to do with external data and displaying that external data. So we'll be talking about that product as we go through the webinar this afternoon. So I've contributed or authored a couple of books on the business connectivity services, which we'll just talk about in a moment. Also many other books, and really I'm a SharePoint geek. So I've been involved in really all aspects of SharePoint. Prior to Lightning Tools, used to work as a trainer, of which I taught SharePoint development, and that's with a company called Combined Knowledge in the UK. And back in 2007, wanting to get my hands dirty again, we created Lightning Tools and began making products for Microsoft SharePoint, and of course now Microsoft SharePoint Online as well. So two books, as I mentioned, back in 2007, I co-authored with my then business partner, Nick Swan, a book on developing with the Business Data Catalog. So the Business Data Catalog actually predates the Business Connectivity Services, which was essentially a rename, but also introduced many new things to SharePoint 2010. So the Business Data Catalog became the Business Connectivity Services, and myself and two colleagues, Phil Duffy and Penny Coventry, authored the book on Business Connectivity Services in SharePoint 2010. Which was a little bit more of a end user type book. So the developer's guide focused a lot on the object model and so on, and connecting to external data sources, whereas the SharePoint 2010 Business Connectivity Services book was mainly around using BCS, administering it, and also connecting to external data sources as well. So there isn't a 2013 or 2016 book. I've written Business Connectivity Services chapters for some other books. Bill English's book, for example, has a BCS chapter written by myself, and there's admin companions and step-by-step books and so on that also incorporate BCS. Okay, so what are we going to be talking about today? Well, we're going to be focusing on working with external data in SharePoint, and we're going to be looking at some different options that are available to you, not just Lightning Tools products, but also what's out of the box with SharePoint as well. So we will really sort of try and point out how you can use business connectivity services on its own in SharePoint to access external data, and we'll be talking about that in both SharePoint Online and also SharePoint On-Premises as well. Also some of the new tools, we'll just mention those, so other things that you may not have considered for accessing external data. So some new tools that are available in SharePoint Online, which you could go and take a look at as an alternative. So trying to stay very neutral, I just want to introduce to you some of the different ways of accessing data, some of the issues that you may come across if you are using business connectivity services. So business connectivity services is going to be our focus, and then how the Lightning Tools products fit in to make that story a little bit better than it is out of the box as well. So the out-of-the-box options for working with external data, they differ depending on whether you're using SharePoint Online or SharePoint On-Premises, and obviously SharePoint Online is moving very, very quickly these days. In fact, if we just mention SharePoint Online, that also includes some of the Office 365 products that interact with SharePoint Online. And then, of course, we've got SharePoint 2013 and SharePoint 2016 as well. In fact, all the bullet points there also refer back to SharePoint 2010 as well, with the exception of the hybrid option. So there's lots of different options for connecting to external data. There's also other vendors as well, so obviously not just Lightning Tools, there's other vendors that also provide different ways of accessing external data. So you consider those two, I'm going to show you BCS and how that would work. So under SharePoint Online, you do have business connectivity services. It's not gone away. It hasn't gone away in SharePoint 2016 either. Although it has been out for 10 years in one form or another now. So like I say, it was established as the Business Data Catalog, and it's moved on through most of the changes taking place in SharePoint 2010 era, but also some new features being introduced into SharePoint 2016, such as the hybrid features and so on as well. So under SharePoint Online, Business Connectivity Services offers most of the different options that you have with BCS, all the different services. We have the external list. So most of you will probably, if not used it, come across the external list and maybe even wonder what it is when you go to create an app on your team site or add an app on your team site. There's also some web parts as well, so these are the business data web parts. There's a whole suite of different web parts that you can work with, depending on whether you want to show just a single list of data or whether you want to show the related data from your external data source. So if you have a relational database either in Oracle or SQL or something, and you wanted to build the one-to-many joins, or reflect the one-to-many joins within inside a SharePoint team site or on a SharePoint web part page, you could effectively show that same join using web part connections and a BCS association. So for example, you might want to show a single web part showing customers, and as you select a customer, you would be able to see the orders related to that customer and so on. In fact, we'll have a quick look at that in just a moment. There's also something called the external data column, and this is a fantastic field type that you have available to you in any SharePoint list or library. And this is some of the functionality that makes BCS unique to other options as well that are available. So take, for example, you've got a large user base there, maybe salespeople or whatever type of people they are, they're creating documents inside document libraries. And when you're creating documents inside document libraries, it's a great idea to put in some meaningful metadata so that you can find that data more easily in the future, whether it's by navigation and views or by search. So either of those options allow you to easily navigate to the data or find it through the search site. However, if you stick to some of the standard columns, so single line of text columns or multiple line of text columns or something like that, obviously the data that's input by the end users isn't consistent. So we get typos, we get abbreviations, that sort of thing, or it's just left blank or whatever. We can use, obviously, manage metadata. And managed metadata would allow us to look up from a number of different terms in a hierarchy. So we could use the managed metadata as well to make the metadata more consistent inside a document library. However, one of the advantages that BCS external data columns have over that is the fact that you can look up from data that actually resides in an existing database. So take, for example, that we have salespeople that are storing customer quotations or invoices inside a document library, and they want to store some metadata such as a customer name coming from their CRM database, or maybe it's the salesperson's name, whatever. It would be better if they could actually look at from live data and store that, so you're not having to maintain a term store, if that makes sense for all of those different customers. So there's also Office integration as well. So BCS integrates with pretty much all of Office, Outlook, Word, Excel, Visio, and so on. You can even design forms in InfoPath, so that's still available today. And also there's a client-side object model. So if you wanted to build your own custom solution using business connectivity services, so you don't want to reinvent the wheel, you don't want to start your coding from scratch, you can actually utilize the connection to the data source and just simply call methods to return data and also filters on that data as well. So it makes it a little bit more less code heavy. You're just simply using an existing object model to obtain that data. So all of that business connectivity services is available for 2013, 2016 as well. You also have the enterprise search in SharePoint On-Premises. So if you're using the enterprise version of your SharePoint on-prem license, then you can also configure a connection to a line of business data source using BCS. So that will allow that data source to be indexed via SharePoint, so that your users have a single place. They can go to the enterprise search team site and enter a keyword, and that keyword could return SharePoint list items, it could return documents, but equally it could return data coming from your external system as well. So you've got a single place inside your organization where you can go and look up information and bring that back. It's also possible to open up those items using a profile page. So let's say you searched on a customer name. The customer name is returned inside the results. You can click onto that result and it will open up a page called a profile page that shows the customer details in a column format. And if you've gone to the effort of building the association as well, so maybe you have built a join between customers and orders to order details, all of those related records will also show on the same profile page as well. So even if you searched on a customer, you'll start to see the customer and also all of the orders for that customer inside the same search result. So there's also user profile import as well. So many people I know have a difficulty getting users to enter information inside their user profiles in their SharePoint user profiles, and this just makes SharePoint so much better if you can use some of the audience targeting features and people searches and things like that. So again, those people searches and the audience targeting is only as good as the information that the users are entering, just like the metadata. So what we can do, if we've got an existing database that we can connect to get that user profile information, maybe we have some sort of HR system, we can connect to that HR system and pull in and map some of those fields through to the SharePoint user profile, which will just make, like I say, audience targeting and searching a lot better. Besides that, we get the rest. So you've also got the external list, the data Webparts, the data column, Office integration, and also the SharePoint object model as well, both client side and server side. So from another point of view, there's other options depending on what you want to do. So one of the things that will hopefully be clear right now is the fact that business connectivity services is not just about displaying data to the end user. That's typically the assumption. People are aware of the Webparts, but it goes on beyond that. It's not just about the external list either that allows the ability to create, update, and delete items. As I mentioned, things like the external data column, the Office integration, and search are bits that are often overlooked, and they are really powerful. So we get all of that, plus you've got other options as well, such as Power BI. So if you wanted to, maybe you're not interested in looking at that data, you do just want to build some charts, build a dashboard of information, then you could do that using Power BI. And there's also Power Apps now as well. Through the Common Data Service, you can build forms for mobile devices, etc., and synchronize that with SharePoint. So there's some great insights to your external data sources through Power Apps as well, with also the ability to create custom data services. So business connectivity services will focus in on that. So BCS, as I mentioned, offers something called the external list. So the external list can be created in any version of SharePoint from 2010 onwards. So even if you're using SharePoint Foundation, you have the ability to create an external list. Now the main benefits of an external list, number one, is the data is not linked to the data is linked to, it's not imported into SharePoint. And there are several tools out there that actually you can point to a data source, a table full of information, maybe you've got 10 or 15,000 rows or more, and you can import the data into a list living in SharePoint. One of the issues with that is the fact that you're overinflating the content database. All that information that you've got inside your external data source, you're duplicating it and putting it into the SharePoint content database as SharePoint list items. So we've now got a duplicate of all of that data taking up twice as much space, and also you're going to suffer from things like sync issues and record locking and so on. So one of the beauties of the external list is the fact that you are connecting to the external data. You're not actually importing that data into the list itself. Now that also has some downsides. So some of the limitations are mainly all around the fact that SharePoint doesn't see the data changing. So if somebody updates a customer record or somebody deletes a customer record or something like that, we can't trigger anything as a result. For example, you may want to trigger a workflow or something along those lines. So it can be done. It can be done from SharePoint 2013 onwards. You can effectively trap events firing, but it will require you to write some code in order to fire those in order to fire those workflows. It's not something that you can simply go and add a workflow to because SharePoint isn't aware of the item changing. You'll also notice that things like quick edit views don't exist. The ability to edit item permissions don't exist, and you also can't create additional columns in an external list as well. So that could sometimes be really useful to take maybe a list of customers, for example, from your external data source, and then simply add something like a KPI column inside an external list. That would allow you to build a better solution. You can do styling as well inside the external list, but unfortunately it is through XSLT. You used to, in SharePoint 2010, use SharePoint Designer and the Design tab to go and make some changes. So if you just wanted a quick fix, maybe some data formatting was incorrect, like a date time format or currency format was incorrect or something, you could very easily quickly fix that using SharePoint Designer and save you changes. One of the issues with that is if you go and make a change again inside your external list properties, then that could actually re-overwrite the changes again that you just made in SharePoint Designer. So it was a little bit clunky anyway. So the other alternative is to make changes in XSLT if you want to style the data at all using the external list. So besides all of that, they're really powerful. Let's go in and take a look. So here we have a SharePoint team site. And inside this SharePoint team site, we have a number of different external lists down on the left-hand side here. So we could just go through and access one of them. So this is a external list called customers. As you can see, we've got several different columns within our view. And if we click the ellipsis, you'll also see some of the different operations that we can perform on there. Now these are optional. You don't have to create these operations. If you want to have an external list that's read-only, just simply displaying some data, by all means you can. You just omit the creation of the other methods. But also, this does give us a quick and easy way of updating some data. So we can go into edit item, for example, and you can see here we've got Alfred's Futterkist from Berlin. And we can see all of his contact data there, and we can also change it. And as we change it, it's immediately writing that back to the underlying data source, since this data doesn't actually reside here in SharePoint. We can also go through and click onto the list ribbon, and all of the things that you would expect that you could do with the standard SharePoint list. Typically, you can do most of those with an external list as well. So you have things like the export to Excel. You also have the ability to create views. So you could create a view for each city of customers and things like that if you wanted to, allowing users to be able to navigate to them quite quickly. So that's exactly the same settings that you would have in any SharePoint list. You can also set permissions on the external list itself, but just not on the items. And the other thing to point out as well is the views. You can not only create a view from within the UI, but every single finder method that you generate when you're creating the external content type will automatically become a new view. So you can do all of that hard work for your customers, for your end users before they actually get to add the external lists to their environment. So the external list is really very simple to deploy. Once you've got the connection, so once your developers or whoever is building the connection has done that, a site owner can simply go through to add an app to their SharePoint environment, and you'll see under the list of apps there's a app called an external list. So as we scroll down, there's the external list, so we can select that, we can give it a name, and we can also go ahead and choose the content type. So each of the entities are referred to as content types. So we have things like products, suppliers, orders, and customers, and so on, all coming from external data. So if I wanted to use suppliers, I could select that. We'll name this suppliers and click create. Okay, so or something will go wrong, and that's purely because this is in a demo. So and I mentioned the word that this was easy to do. So let's try that again with a different external data source. Just let's select something like products and hope for the best here. So we'll call this BL_products. It might actually be that I had one already called suppliers, perhaps. Let's see. Okay, so looks like that successfully created that time. So we have an external list called BL_products, and we can go into that. And of course, okay, there's another error. Now this error is actually different. This is one that you could actually come across easily by yourself. And this is a secure store provider error. So it's just actually not got a user mapping from the user that I'm currently logged on to the external data source. So, so that's using secure store, the single sign-on. But either way, they're the steps that you would go through to create a external list. So as well as the external list, you have the external data column. So I've mentioned that this is a way of looking up to your external data source and pulling the data in as metadata. So you can see obviously this customer has lots of room for typos. So if that customer already existed inside our CRM system, then we could basically do a lookup and store that company name and also related metadata inside a document library or any other SharePoint list or library. So once again, if we navigate back and we'll have a look inside this document library here called quotations. So we have a number of different Word documents already created. You can see one of the sets of data has already been looked up, and we can go through and set the properties on that document as well. So if we go to the properties, and this works exactly the same as any other metadata inside a SharePoint document library. So if you see the document information panel in Word, you can populate it via that. You can also use quick parts in Word to populate the BCS columns, and of course when you upload a document you would also be prompted for the metadata that way as well. So when we're creating the document, we have a lookup here to customer, and I can go through and perform a lookup. Now deliberately I've done a common mistake here, which is just showing me the customer ID. So what's quite important is when you go through and create your external content type, which we will do shortly, that you mark all of the columns that you want to include in the picker. Okay. And quite often you may decide that you want to have multiple methods, one for the external lists, maybe another one for search, and maybe another one for your picker option as well, so that users can come through and see which customer they actually want to store. Just going by the customer ID isn't really great. So we'll choose one. We'll select this guy, click on OK, and you can see it stored the name of the customer, and as we hit save, we've got the lookup there. But like I say, if we wanted to actually display the customer name or display the county or country or whatever inside that picker, then we can also do that. There's also some limitations with that picker that I'll point out. So when we go to perform the lookup, besides the fact that I'm only returning the customer ID, another limitation is that this picker will only display 200 rows. So if you've got more than 200 customers, you've had it. So what you can do is filter or use the find, but in order for your users to be able to do that, you've first of all got to make that filter available to them, and that's one of the things that you can do when you go ahead and build your external content type. So I can't actually filter on anything right now because I don't have a filter on my finder method. Even though the controls for the filter are displayed, we still need to build the filter for that to work. And you can create what's known as a wildcard filter. So if you have a wildcard filter, maybe you've got more than 200 customers in any region or in any town or whatever, so that's going to be very difficult to filter by town or region, but then you could filter on the customer name, and using a wildcard filter, that would allow you to maybe just type in the first few characters of that name, hit find, and hopefully that way you'd get less than the 200 and be able to select one of the items. So we'll just choose another one of those, hit save, and as you can see, we're building up something that's metadata now and storing that alongside the document. So any of these are actually stored against the document, these values, which means we can now search on it, we could build views. So if we wanted to have a Mexico customers view, UK customers view, or anything like that, we could do so using that metadata as well. Okay, so to create those columns, very straightforward. If we just go to any old document library, there's another example here of this looking at products. But if we go to any document library, click onto the library link, and in here is a create column. There we go. If we click onto create column, we can choose from the different field types. So the field type that we're after is the one called external data. So we select external data, and as we scroll down, we could choose the external content type. So here we have suppliers, so I could choose suppliers, and I could tell it that I want to store the supplier name, but also show address and city in the metadata as well. So we'll just call that supplier. Click on OK. So that's now available inside my document library. We have that field there ready to accept metadata. Okay, so the external data column is fantastic. There's also the business data web parts. So there's multiple different web parts that you have. If we just navigate back up to the home page of this team site, you'll see that I've got two different types of web parts added on the page here. So the one on the left is the business data list web part. So that's returning the results of the finder method essentially. So it's showing me all of the different customers there, and we've got an association between customers and orders. So when we select a customer, that fires a connection across to the related list. So this is a business data related list web part, and you can see that it's returning 4 orders there for the customer that I had selected. And you can keep on drilling down into the data using that same thing. Now, when it comes to doing some styling and so on, as I mentioned, you can no longer do that using SharePoint Designer. You must go into XSLT. So the web part itself offers a property pane. So if we go to edit the page, one of the things that we might want to fix is the date time. So maybe we only need to show the date, not the date time. Some of these values also go to 4 decimal places. Maybe we only need them to 2 decimal places. And besides that, we might also want to do something like conditional formatting. So maybe we want to highlight data of a certain level of importance. So if we click Edit Web Part, we have the XSLT editor. So we can select that. That displays the XSLT, and that's where we can go through and make some styling changes. So not really ideal doing it that way. You can, however, as I point out, click on Edit View, and this isn't necessarily styling changes, but it does allow you to make some refinements, such as which columns are displayed and any filters that you want to apply after the data is fetched, and pagination options and things like that, which is obviously very useful. So they're just web parts. You can insert them on any page by going through the normal insert web part method, and you'll find that there's under business data, the business data list and the business data related list. They're the 2 web parts that we used here. There are some other ones as well, such as business data item, business data actions, and things like that, which you can also use in your environment. Okay, so let's just bypass those changes. So how do we create the external content type? So we can create the external content type is basically the connection to the data source, along with a number of different methods. So the methods, there's about 5 or 6 of them. There's the finder method that returns all of the data, so it's all of the columns and all of the rows, and that finder method can have filters on it. It's recommended to also have filters on it. You can have multiple finder methods as well, so they will automatically become different views, as mentioned. You also have the read item method. Now this is quite key, because everywhere where we select a single row, it's going to call the item method and pass through the identifier for that row. So your identifier must be set to the primary key or a unique column. So you can't have duplicate column values inside an identifier, otherwise it won't know which item to open up when you're trying to open up a single item. And besides that, if you want to have the ability to create, update, delete, then you have a method for each of those. There's also an ID enumerator, which is for the search indexing, and finally you may also have an association which allows you to perform a join between two different data sources as well. So that needs to be created. So you can do it all in Notepad. And that's not really a joke. People do it in Notepad. So you'll see an example in a moment in Notepad. So the reason why people do it in Notepad is quite often they copy and paste them and change them to suit their own requirements from examples out on the internet. And that's called developing. So there's also Visual Studio, which you can use. So you can use Visual Studio with SharePoint Online or also SharePoint On-Prem. So if you're using it with SharePoint Online, then you can only deploy your external content type as an app, and you get the external list only. So it's also possible, that's not the only way of doing it with SharePoint Online. You can build the BDC model and import that into SharePoint Online, so it'll have the scope of the tenant. So all of these different sets of data could be displayed in different site collections and so on. Whereas if you're deploying it as an app, it's just in one site and it's the external list only. You don't get the external data column or anything like that. So you can also create custom code using Visual Studio for SharePoint On-Prem, so you can create a .NET type that gets deployed, and you can also obviously expose data. Maybe you've got some on-prem data that you want to expose as a WCF service or OData, and then they can be consumed by SharePoint Designer. The SharePoint Designer natively will only allow a connection to SQL Server, or you can connect to a .NET assembly that you created in Visual Studio or a WCF service that you created or you have available as well. So the other alternative is to use the our product BCS Madman. So that's one of the products that we're going to look at now. So with BCS Madman, you can use it for both SharePoint Online and also SharePoint On-Premises as well. So there are some limitations for SharePoint Online, mainly because the data doesn't reside somewhere where we can access it easily. So we can connect to SQL Azure, we can connect to OData, and we can connect to WCF services. If we were to connect to an on-premise data source, then of course you could expose that as an OData service. So if you did have Oracle or SQL on-prem, we could create that an OData service first, expose the data, and then connect to that using Meta Man. On-prem, there's a whole load of different data sources. So you can connect to SQL, Oracle, a whole bunch of different ODBC data sources, Salesforce.com, Dynamics Online, there's all sorts of things that you can connect to using that. And then we can deploy it as a BDC model file, which will become available through the farm in SharePoint On-Prem. So the user interface is straightforward. It's a Windows application. We can go through, select the data source that we want to connect to, and build out our relationships and things like that, just simply using drag and drop. So we'll jump into the product, have a look at it. So this is BCS Madman here. As I mentioned, along the left-hand side, we have a number of different data sources. If we go to something like ODBC, you'll see there's more in there. So this is where we've got things like MySQL, Microsoft DAX, Informix, and so on and so forth. Or we can connect directly to any Oracle server, Salesforce.com, Dynamics Online, and so on. So here, for example, in fact, let me just make this available full screen for a moment. So here, for example, I'm going to connect to Salesforce, and over on the left hand side we can click onto tables and see all the different tables available to me. So here's one called account, for example. So I just simply drag and drop the fact that I want to have account, and I can choose from a variety of different methods. So we have the two required ones, the finder and the specific finder at the top, and then we've also got the creator, updater, deleter, and the ID enumerator if we wanted to be able to search that data as well. So once we've created the join to that, we can go through and do things like preview the data and build associations between the different data sources. So if I click onto this icon in the top right hand corner, this will show us the first 10 rows of our data in salesforce.com, and then we could go ahead and deploy that if we wanted to. So another type of connection, let's go through to SQL Server, since most of our audience is connecting to SQL Server. So we can connect to any SQL Server that's accessible. We've got different types of authentication, whether you want to use username, password, or Windows authentication. You can also use Secure Store, and you have a database picker and so on as well that you can select from. So here, for example, we can hit the drop down there and choose a database on that server and connect to it. So we'll hit connect. We can go to tables, go and grab something like the, let's see, let's go and grab suppliers. So I can drag suppliers onto the design surface, do the same thing again, choose my creator, updater, deleter methods. We could go and grab orders. Sorry, that doesn't make sense. Let's cancel that one. We could grab products, so we can see which products each supplier supplies. So we'll drop that onto the table, hit create, and now we can build a join between those two. So as I drag the join between suppliers and products, we get to map the primary key and the foreign key. So I can select the supplier ID from the supplier's entity and supplier ID is the foreign key from the product's entity. Hit create, and now we've got an adjoin. So that's the association. Just simply by dragging and dropping and setting those two fields, we've got an association so that we can now use the one-to-many relationships in SharePoint. So other than that, it's just a case of giving all of this a name. So we can specify the name of our model. So we'll call this suppliers underscore products. I'm just going to use that same name just for time's sake for the model namespace log system, although I'd be a bit more careful with that usually. Sorry, just bring that back up again. Okay, and we can use this in SharePoint Online or SharePoint On-Prem. Let's save that, and we can hit deploy or generate. Now this will moan about creating a limit filter, which we've not touched on yet. So we can go through and set limit filters and things like that on the data. So you just get a little warning saying you didn't create a limit filter. It's a good idea to create a limit filter. So, so that's busy deploying. And then we'll have a look at some of the other options. So yeah, there's the warning about limit filter, but either way we will have in SharePoint if we just refresh our external content types that are available here, we will now have a new set of external content types. So we have a new suppliers connection and a new products connection as well. Okay, so they can just be added into SharePoint. You can set permissions on them from this page and so on and so forth. Okay, so creating a model file is pretty straightforward. What about displaying the data? So we mentioned some of the limitations of displaying the data inside an external list and also with the Webparts, and that is you have to do a lot of your styling and so on using XSLT. So what we offer here is something called the Data Viewer, and it's available SharePoint On-Premises. It has been available for a number of years now for SharePoint On-Premises. You don't have to use it in conjunction with business connectivity services. You can use it to connect to different data sources directly. So we can connect to it, connect it to SQL directly, Oracle directly. We can connect to SharePoint lists, OData, XML, WCF services, and so on, using the on-prem version. And then there's a whole wide range of styling and grouping and conditional formatting and things like that that you can go through and do using the UI. For SharePoint Online, for a few years now, we've had the Data Viewer add-in available. It's available in the App Store for SharePoint. It's fairly limited because the app model is fairly limited. There's literally, our hands have been tied on this for a number of years now. Because of the app model, we don't actually have the permission to go and connect to external data sources using the SharePoint add-in model. So it can connect to SharePoint lists inside the current site collection. So if you wanted to do some styling around a task list or something like that, you can. Or we can connect to the app scoped external content type. Now the issue with that is you have to first of all create that external content type using Visual Studio for it to be available and can be used using the data viewer. So there's also the client-side web part that we've been working on for almost a year now. So the SharePoint Framework client-side web part is going to replace the data viewer add-in because you don't have the same restrictions in the SharePoint Framework than you do in the SharePoint add-in model. So we can also connect to SharePoint lists, we can connect to OData as a new data source as well, and we can connect to the tenant scoped external content types, which is something that we could generate using Meta Man. So you have the best of both worlds again using the client-side web part, and there's more data sources on the roadmap for that product, including things like Salesforce.com, Dynamics Online, and so on. Okay, so we'll take a look at the data viewer. So we're just simply going to navigate back to our data viewer page. And here's a configured example. So this one here shows me data. It's got some conditional formatting going on. So it's highlighting data over a certain value. You can see we've got also some options that allow us to go through and edit the item. So we can call the edit item methods, make changes through that, as well as delete items. And again, these are all optional. You have things like grouping, and we have calculated columns if you want to create a calculated column, and we've also got summary functions that you can use as well. So we'll have a look at how this has been configured. So if we hit the drop down for the web part and choose configure web part, under the web part tab, there's the different data sources that we can connect to. So we have, as I mentioned, BCS, which is what's currently selected. We've got Microsoft SQL, Oracle, ODBC again, SharePoint lists, and so on. So we can choose the type of data source provider, and that will in effect change the data source tab here. So if we were connecting to a BCS external content type, or external data source, then we can go through and map the name of the external content type as well as its methods, so the finder method, creator method, updater method, and so on. We basically choose those from a drop-down list here. So we can hit the drop-down and choose each one. It's going to default to the same type, so usually there's only one option in there. If we were connecting to anything else, so if we wanted to connect to a SharePoint list, for example, we go to the data source tab, and you'll notice in there that we can now browse to a SharePoint list. So we can expand all of our different site collections, get to a site and a list that we want to use, and then we can select that and start to do some formatting and grouping and so on. So these all depend on what it is we're connecting to. Obviously we can connect to Oracle, and the data source tab will change to suit an Oracle connection. The rest of it will be the same, so it doesn't matter what you connect to, all of the styling options and so on are identical. So with this, we're just going to go through and map those again to the products. Click onto the columns tab, and we can select the columns that we want to display. So here I've just selected all of them. We'll get rid of category ID, maybe drag product name up to the top there. So you can drag the columns into the order that you want to see them in. Another option we have is the ability to add a calculated column. So this is one of the limitations, remember, of the external list. You can't add new columns to it. So something that we might want to do, for example, is just calculate a new price. So maybe the price includes a sales tax or something like that. So we could have sales tax as a column. We'll specify the type of data it's going to be, so it's going to be double, and we'll go through and choose a unit price field and drop that in here, and we'll just simply times that by 0.02 and hit save. So now we have a new column, sales tax, and we can drop that onto the page wherever we want it to appear. You can apply sorting, and we can sort by multiple different columns. Maybe I want to sort by product name, but I also want to sort by units in stock in descending order. So here you can now specify your primary and your secondary sort. So we can choose how we want to sort that data. You have filtering as well. There's two different types of filters. We can set a filter in stone for all of the users from the dialog box here, and that will take somebody with design permissions to be able to change it. We also have dynamic filters, so that allows the end users to change the filter on the fly inside the SharePoint UI. Notice also that you can configure filter consuming columns. So this actually allows me to get a filter from some of the SharePoint filter web parts. So you can use some of the filter provider web parts to pass through the filter to this product. As we go on to the display tab, that shows you all of the columns, and now we can go through and do things like set the type of data. So we can set currency for unit price and likewise for sales tax. There's column aliases that we might want to set. So notice, for example, that none of these database columns have spaces in them, so we could have units space in stock as an example. So we can set a new alias for it. You can set column widths. We can group by different columns as well, so we might want to group by category ID or supplier ID, something like that. And then we have the whether you want to display those values and things like conditional formatting too. So what I want to do is set some conditional formatting on the units in stock. So if we go below a certain stock level, it will get highlighted. So we'll highlight it in a nice bright color, make it bold, and we can set the units in stock to less than 5, let's say. Okay, and if we wanted to add multiple levels of conditional formatting, we can. So we can minimize this one and go through and add another row of conditional formatting and maybe format that for another value. So if it's less than 10 or greater than 5, then display it in a different color, and so on. Okay, so we can save that. As we scroll down further, we've got things like pagination. Do we want the insert, update, delete? Do we want to automatically render URLs that are returned as column values, so you can click on them? All sorts of different refinements in here that you can set. So if we hit save, we've essentially reconfigured this, and great, it's again recognizing that I'm in webinar or demo mode. So I'm just going to run through that very quickly again, and if it doesn't work, then so be it. So we'll connect here to customers. I'm just going to try that one very quickly. That will do. We'll select all those fields. Let's delete that sales tax. Okay, we'll put company name first, and we'll hit display. And let's highlight a certain country in a certain color. So we'll add Germany in there, and let's hit save, and save again, and hope for the best. There we go. So very quickly, we managed to get some data coming back. Obviously something was causing an issue there, maybe my calculated column or something. But so you can see the conditional formatting. If we wanted to add some grouping or something, let's go back in and maybe group by country instead of using the conditional formatting. So easily we could go through and select country, set a group on there, and let's remove the conditional formatting since that wouldn't make sense anymore, and we'll hit save. So now we've got the data grouped by country, and you could have multiple groups. So that's using the data viewer, and as I mentioned, the data viewer is also available very soon. We're launching this at the SB TechCon event, which is going to be in Austin, Texas at the beginning of April. The data viewer, as you can see, it's already built. It allows us to do pretty much the same thing, but in SharePoint Online you can access many more data sources than we were able to using the add-in model for SharePoint Online. So the last product I want to show you is the SharePoint Chart. We're going to navigate back to SharePoint, click onto Chart, and you'll see we've got a few charts already configured. There's a couple of examples. So we have a mixed chart showing a surface and column chart in the same display. There's another one here which is actually showing me just a standard 3D column chart. One of the things that the chart Webpart offers is also the ability to drill down and interact with the data. So you'll notice here, for example, that for some reason Q1 of 1998 we had lots of orders. So if we wanted to investigate that, we could click onto that quarter, and here it now changes to show the data per month. So we can see, well, March was an exceptionally good month. Let's click onto March, what happened in March, and now we can see how many orders we got per day, and so on. So you could also get a breadcrumb trail, so you can navigate back to each of those different levels and see that data, as well as the ability to filter it. So what you will do as somebody that's configuring the chart is making the filters available to your users. So you can decide what columns you want them to be able to filter on. So here, for example, we've got ship country, and I could set that through to Germany again. And you've got ands and ors and things like that you can do, and we could go through and preview that data. So Q1 you can see is now back on a level with Q2 of the previous year, and so on. So you can preview the data and apply that filter if that's something that we want to do. So in order to configure a chart, we basically just hit the configuration wizard for the chart. We can select what it is we want to connect to. So here's a drop down of the different data sources. So this you can connect to pretty much the same data sources as the other two products. So SharePoint Lists, Oracle, SQL, and so on. You can also connect it to Business Connectivity Services. So we can select that one, hit connect, and we can choose from the different systems that we have in place. So here's orders. So we'll connect to the orders table, hit view data, and there's a sample of our data coming back that we can work with. You can also work with Excel workbooks, and that's also independently of SharePoint Excel services as well. So we've previewed the data. We can go through and select the columns that we want to display. So I could go and choose something like the order ID and the order date. So we can select that. Or in fact, we could do country. Let's do that so we've got something different. So I can hit apply. And as we choose next, we're able to filter the data. So we can filter it for maybe sales within a certain time frame or something like that. And we can also group the data. So if I enable grouping, this will allow me to group by ship country, and then we can do something else with the other column. So the other column being order ID, we could go through and do a count. So as we hit apply, we get a sample of what our chart's going to look like. So you can see the chart's already created with, again, a preview of the data. And now it's a case of going through and defining what our chart's going to look like. So you can filter it as well. As I mentioned, we can choose different chart types. So we have single series charts, multiple series charts, there's stacked charts and combination charts that you can choose from. So all sorts of different things there. If we build a pie chart this time, so we can have a 2D or a 3D pie chart, we can preview it to see what it's going to look like. And if we like the look of it, then we accept it and choose next. So some of the things that we might want to change, we can add a chart title, so number of orders per country. So we could apply that, and like I said, everything that you set, you'll be able to preview to see what it's going to look like. We have the series customization as well. So you've got the label column so that you could change that if you wanted to. How is it sorted, and so on. So all of those things can be changed. You can choose not to show the data labels and the data values if you want to. So we could go through and apply that. So that makes our chart show a little bit better, and instead we could jump down to legend and show a chart legend, and then we can go through and choose where we want that legend to appear and what we want that to look like as well. So now we get the legend appearing within inside the chart. There's other cosmetics and number formatting that you can do, so you can change pretty much every part of this. You can change whatever colors you want, background colors, shading, all sorts of things, opaqueness and what have you. And there's also some other settings. So what happens if there is no data to return? We might link this to another web part even, and that web part's not returning data, so we could handle that with a custom error that you can display in here. The drill down section, this allows me to do something else if somebody clicks onto the chart. So there's 5 different options. So what might we want to do? Well, you saw before how I could drill down into from quarter to months to days, showing the number of orders per time period. So that is basically one of these options. We could also decide to display the underlying data so that we can show that, or we can actually just send a link to somewhere else. So if you click the chart, we could navigate to another page, and that works with query parameters. So we can pass through the actual pie that was clicked to a new window, and that might filter something like a document library or a list, depending on what it is we were landing on. Okay, so there's several different options for the drill down. The dynamic filters, so this is where we can set those. So if you wanted to filter, we just allow the user to filter somehow. So maybe we could look at a certain date range, so I'll allow them to filter on the order date. And then do we want them to be able to export? So I can allow them to print the chart, to be able to export it as an Excel spreadsheet and also as a PDF. So we can apply all of those and hit finish. And we now have a chart on our page. So the chart's again interactive, so we can spin it around in circles. This is just something that you can do whilst you see that working on it with SharePoint. So just spin your own pie chart, and we can also select the different pies if we wanted to highlight something. So you can imagine showing somebody this on a tablet or something like that, and you want to be able to highlight something on there. So that's possible as well. Okay, so the chart's very easy to create, and the benefit of them, they are in context. So they're easy for an end user to be able to create and add to the page. They're not having to learn Power BI or reporting services or something. It's just a chart web part that they can go through and configure the wizard as they go through it. So relatively intuitive for most users. So you can also access data from Office 365 SharePoint Online as well, even if that data resides on premises. There are some blog posts and so on that I could point you to if you go to the lightningtools.com website and just simply do a search on SharePoint Online external data, and it will return a blog post showing how to use Visual Studio to make external data that resides on premises available as an OData service. And once it's available as an OData service, you can use Meta Man to generate the connection to it, build a model file and import that into your SharePoint Online environment. Okay, so the products that I did show you there, they are all available as a bundle as well. So you'll find that there is a discounted price on the suite of products, but each of those products are also available independently of one another. So you can go and check those out on the website as well. And at that point, I'm just going to open up for questions. So if you want to ask a question, there's several ways that you can do that. You can raise your hand using the GoToWebinar software. Don't physically raise your hand because I won't see that. So there is a raise hand symbol, and I can see that you've raised your hand in my interface, or you can drop me an email, and the email address is brett@lightningtools.com. So brett@lightningtools.com, or if you follow us on Twitter, then feel free to send out a tweet as well.